Called me some weeks ago, thanks to U.V. Krishna Rao, who is the villain of the piece. I said to myself, so what do I present? Especially when it's an organization as significant as ISKCON is, in terms of this sort of consciousness that they have been building over several decades. The next I hear is that I get a mail from Yudhishthir, and he gives me a very, very wide canvas, talking of civilization, the history and culture of not just India, but of nations and so on. So it kind of, set me thinking on what we could offer. And then he imposed this incredibly impossible time frame of 16 minutes. Is that right, Yudhishthir, or how much time do I have now? 18, okay. All right, so let's get on with it. I've learned to believe that this is not about sustainability at all, and that look at this. And that photograph in the backdrop is from somewhere in the Great Pacific area. It's called the garbage patch, if anyone knows of what happens on the western seaboard of the United States. The 2 million plastic beverage bottles that every 15 minutes in the US alone. Now you want to come to figures in India, they're a little less, but they are not any less formidable. This is how we live. You can see that picture in the background. And this is how we shop. Does your life revolve around a very different idea of consumption, you and I? Is your lifestyle any different? Are you in the minority if you are that kind of a person who insists on using telephones that are 8 years old because you are worried about what can be the source disconnect on damage to silicon, to water, and so on? Why is it that you and I don't want to do more? Or why is it that we don't want to lose some of our bad habits? We all know that we can't get around to getting another planet, as the minister was also saying. Do you realize this other thing, that if you're really looking at anything that you buy, you need to go to the source connect. This is a palm oil plantation in Malaysia. How can you start thinking source when you buy? The next time you buy a palm oil bottle in the local shop, I'd like you to think of this. The next time you buy cotton for your apparels, I'd like you to think of where that cotton is coming from. What is the damage to soils that BT is just now causing? What else can you do about it? What can you do about the steel that you buy, the concrete that you buy, the riverbed sand that you use for buildings, the floors and the forest timber that you buy for things that you need to be housing yourself in? So I asked myself at some point in time, what is it that really actually is at the bottom of all of these things? And I've come up with 8 kinds of challenges that I see at least, of why we don't want to become sustainable. I'll be putting up 8 slides on this. The first reason I think is that we are very overwhelmed. We step out of a house, we know that the problems are way, way huge, larger than we can handle. Look at just Kochi and what you are facing. You receive something like 2,200 mm rainfall, and you've got a severe shortage of water. You need only about something like, say, 400 million liters a day. I come from a city which needs 1,500 million liters, or 1.5 billion liters. There's another city where I'm doing some work, Bombay, which needs 4 billion liters. You need just a tenth of it. You're only 600,000 people, but the problem is overwhelming. There is clearly, as an individual, that you believe that there is very little you can do about it. And then you say to yourself, well, it's too late, and there's so much to do. What can I do? We don't know where to begin, and so we don't begin at all. There are too many new actions to consider. Will I address energy? Will I address water? Will I address waste? If I'm a corporator in Kochi, what am I going to do? If I'm an MLA in Kochi, do I have the knowledge, the expertise, the capability to do something here that addresses the entire set of concerns that the city brings or the citizens are bringing? Just now in the last 3 weeks in Kochi, you have had citizen engagement workshops that the city administration has been holding as part of the Smart City program. I have been in 4 such other cities, two in Tamil Nadu and 2 in Karnataka. The day before I was in Shimoga, there were 900 people sitting in a meeting. There are a few politicians, there were people from the executive, the DC, the collector, the commissioner, the Urban Development Authority chairman, and so on. Now, there is a whole lot of things that are coming up from citizens, but there is very little action that we can bring. And then you know what happens to us, this business of being overwhelmed also says that there is too much guilt within us. We don't know how to deal with that. And so what do? We do nothing. We buy a bigger car, and like I did, or the minister did, a lot of us did today, we take the aircraft back home. Now, if you ask your father, he didn't do any more than, let us say, 8, 10 rides in his entire lifetime in an aircraft. Most of our fathers. And here, if you ask me, I would have done probably about 200 flights in just the last, say, 6 to 8 months. How do you check air miles? How do you stop this whole pollution that you're doing out there in the sky? How do you drop consumption? Look at this next reason. We are brainwashed. Ads do that to us. Drives aspiration. Whether you're a young person growing up in the villages today, or in small towns, or someone growing up in towns like these, we all aspire to want to be in the city. Migrations are very high. In this group, I can see that the demographic here is quite like what India's is. Under 20, we are 1 in 3 Indians, under 20. We are 2, that is about 600 million Indians. We are 2 out of every, we are 1 out of 2 Indians when it comes to under 25. And we are about 800 plus million Indians who are at under 35. You know what it tells you? People like me are a statistic. We are dead. You are 2 Indians out of 3 who are going to be facing this future in the next, say, 15, 20 years. What do you want to do about that? All our lives from school, we have spent a lot of it thinking about buying things. If you want to change habits, a lifetime's worth of thinking patterns have to change. Learning new ones and essentially breaking up what has been part of the dominant culture so far that you have seen in your 20 or 25 or 30 years. Can you do something about, therefore, breaking your mindsets? Well, in a sense, my first reason and this reason are the same, but they are not quite like that. What can one person's action do to destroy? Now, look at that picture. To-do list, if I can do nothing, that will be the best form of conservation. But can I manage that? For instance, you decide, okay, I'm going to change a light bulb, and that will save the planet. Can it? You use a cloth bag instead of taking that plastic sachet from a shop. You think that will change it? By haranguing politicians, by writing about them and abusing them sometimes, or even starting a green movement, do you think that can make any difference at all? It'll help, but is it going to make a big difference? Our individual ability to improve a huge, very large, complex problem is always limited. As a species, I'm saying. Mankind doesn't know fear of what futures can be. For example, when the tsunami struck Indonesia, a clear 24 hours before it hit India, there were butterflies that suddenly moved out of places. Bees moved away in thousands from their hives. They instinctively knew that something was going wrong, and they moved. Now, many other species have that advantage of being able to see disaster before it comes. Humans don't. And humans don't seem to understand that you simply don't have time. He said about 7 billion becoming 10 billion, and that it has still home, that it has room for a lot more people. The issue is not about how many people we are. The issue is about how we are going to govern ourselves, how we are going to not depend on governments, and how we are going to bring governance. More about it in a couple of slides from here. We can't see the impact of our choices. It's much like reason 2, if you ask me, but I thought about it. There is a certain nuanced difference between what I say in, when we're talking about being brainwashed, or when we're talking about being overwhelmed, and when we talk about what it means for you as a shopper in a mall to largely be unaware of the environmental impact of anything that you buy. For example, a chip in the mobile that you use or the laptop needs a special water that is drawn from about 3 kilometers under the surface. When Intel wanted to make its chips in India sometime in '99, the Indian government refused to give them clearance. They went to China. The reason that we didn't give them clearance at that point of time was that it meant that it will affect some deep aquifers way beyond what humans normally exploit at this level of the surface of the earth. I told you about the example of palm oil and how it is costing Indonesia and Malaysia its forests. And if we think that that forest and the decimation of those things there is not going to affect you, you need to do another think on that. Cotton shirts we buy is hurting people in Uganda and in Nigeria. Here, for instance, if you go to Chhattisgarh, you go to Odisha, you go to some parts of Madhya Pradesh, for instance, and look at the mining that we do of about 28 minerals, without which the economy can't run. In fact, in the first 10 priorities on FDI, mining is standing, I think, 7 or so on priorities. So what happens to you when you go into a mall and see those shiny things? Do you see things that you want to buy, or do you see ugly lies there and deceptions that you need to be confronting yourself? We don't want to know. There is this new thing that we've been hearing about one-minute noodles and lead and the threat of poison and so on. Any one of you here among the ladies using lipstick must understand that every year, if you use it every day, in a year you take about 0.3 kilos of lead into your system, 300 grams. Now, do you want to use lipstick with lead? Are there lipsticks without lead? Are there organic lipsticks? We're not ready to know what really goes into our food, for example, or our cosmetics, the leather wallet that you buy, the clothing that you buy sometimes from a fashion designer. The truth is out there, but we do not want to seek it. Think about that. It's troubling me a great deal. I've done for the last 20, 25 years things on mainstreaming sustainability. Now I'm telling myself, what is this about mainstreaming sustainability? We need to accelerate the whole process. I was just now talking to another dear old friend who comes from the Society of Energy Managers, housed here in Kochi, and he's telling me there's no time for lectures anymore. There's time only for interventions. We are too busy. Look at that picture of banana. If you knew that in order to speed in this process of ripening banana, most dealers who buy banana lock them into airtight rooms and burn candles like these, 15, 20 of them, sometimes more, and drain the oxygen from the room. And over the next 12 to 14 hours, the banana ripens. They don't give it the natural 24, 48, 50, 60-hour cycle that bananas need to ripen. Why do they do that? Because they don't want to hold inventory. They want to buy before it ripens, clear things in the marketplace. It takes a certain kind of human who believes in not having, but in being, to care about something as abstract as the ozone hole, for instance, or that 1 degree change in global average temperature and what it can mean to us. You can check that out the next time in a room where you have, let's say, an air conditioner, and switch that between 25 and, say, 24 degrees, or maybe 24 to 23, and see for yourself what that change can mean in that room. And if you were to take that experiment further and put a few plants there and see what it does to those plants, you'll then understand what that 1 degree global average temperature change can mean. Very few people can actually comprehend that, because the globe has got anywhere from minus 44 degrees to about plus 52 or 55 degree centigrade. Your everyday life is so busy and hectic that you don't have time to think about it. You're too busy. You're full of other concerns. There's no room left to care about something that seems very far away. The ozone hole, don't even talk to me about it. Visit a local dump. Right here in Kochi, for instance, you're producing about, well, if I remember right, about 400 tons per day. We are producing about 3,500 tons in Bombay, in Bangalore. And the Bombay figures are at about 7,000 tons. India's figures today are running at something like 1.2 million, 100 million tons a day is the total waste that we are putting out between about 7,000 towns and cities that we have, if you go by the census survey and so on. So it's not really connecting to our daily lives. Is that our reason that we, don't want to do anything about it? I've got the last two reasons. We are afraid. I told you about cotton. When you buy pickles in the regular market, you'll usually see on the tag that the oil that is used is cottonseed oil. It's cheaper than, say, gingerly oil that you use for pickles, or if you're in the north, you use sesame seed. No, you use what is it called? You use mustard oil, for instance. The cottonseed is far cheaper. It's allowed by the administration. They use it. Now, what do you ingest along with that? Pesticides, because today we got 60% of our cotton on BT. We have lost all our biodiverse varieties of cotton seeds. I'm not even going into those stories, those really grim stories of what is happening on the agricultural front. So is it fear? Why are we afraid of something that we have truly, really messed it up? That in any case, we are not going to be around after some 15, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how old we are. We tell ourselves it's not going to happen, it's not happening. We all understand it's our fault, but we don't want to do anything about it because in a certain sense, like being overwhelmed, we are afraid. So we look for new ways to bury our heads in the sand. Look at everyday's newspapers. Look at how we are in some great, whatever forms of self-denial. We don't want to admit that things are so badly wrong that we need to pull this ourselves out of the brink, individually. I'm not even talking about collective effort. I'm not talking certainly of the government. The government has no role in these things. You and I are the government. Samaj aage to satta piche. Somebody said this to me. When you put the government in front of you meaning as people, you always get disaster. You get vinash. Agar samaj aage ho to satta piche, then you'll get vikas. I heard this somewhere, and I told myself, this makes a lot of sense. Any time in history, if you go back the last, say, 800,000 years, about 1,000 years, 1014, 1015, we had the Ghazni, we had Mahmud of Ghazni here between 999 AD and 1029 or so. In those 30 years, you know what he destroyed. But at the same time, we had 1 year before, 1014, we had the Brihadishwara temple coming up in Chola land, in Tanjavur. We had there were two other significant temples that came up around the same time. The Hoysalas and the Chalukyas were building in Halebeedu and parts of what is today Karnataka. So, in 1,000 years, what we have seen is, whenever there was governance, whenever there was, let us say, the government, we didn't have governments in that sense. We had governance. We had rajas who were benevolent. They left it to the rest of the people to see how they will govern it. Even in Aurangzeb's time, for instance, a king or any of his, suzerainties, they went to villages to only collect taxes. They provided defense. They left the villages to govern themselves. Panchayats as a tradition in India has been very, very strong. Today we have, for instance, about how many of us realize that we have got something like 220,000 panchayats for these 640,000 villages. From the time Gandhiji wrote about it in the 1930s, the number of villages has not changed. And we have got about 35 million Indians who are elected. I don't know how many of you here are elected in some form or the other. Which means approximately for every 50 million Indians, for every 50 Indians, we have got one elected Indian somewhere or the other. And when I go to those meetings, I realize that, there are so many people elected, so many people who can actually shape our destinies, but it's still not happening. Why is that so? It's a chicken and egg. You don't know whether corporations have to play for profit, that is companies, or you need to work for long-term planetary health. Like he said, well, you can straddle both development and the environment, happily. I'm not so sure if you can do that. To get to influencing governments and corporations, we need to care about the problem as individuals first. It seems defeating in the face of such large problems. That's why individual actions and attitudes continue to matter for all of us. Look at those pictures there. The guy on top left, he's a social entrepreneur. He started with 99,000 rupees some 8 or 9 years ago. He has now been working in something like, I think he works in 21 villages in some part of Maharashtra, in Aurangabad district. And he provides drinking water. He helps rural young there in Ahmednagar and in Aurangabad to earn and yet provide clean drinking water to villagers. He says, look, if you got 1 lakh, if you don't have it, I will help you borrow it as an initial investment. And the rest of it will come in a way that you can earn about 30,000 a month as profits. The other guy on the right, Uday Bhai, is somebody from Ahmedabad. In his auto rickshaw, he provides newspapers, magazines. He's got other literature on his city. Then he's got 2 containers there. He's got love and truth written on it. He holds snacks in one, water bottles in another. There is no need for him to actually do this. Why does he do it? What drives him into doing what is not required by him to do? Is there something there that we can learn from and inspire as individual action? A lot of you youngsters here, you can sit back and say, hey, I can't do anything. I don't need to be doing anything. Is that what you want to be doing? For instance, this one on the left here. No, the one on the right. The canteen provides a complete meal. This one at 1 rupee. This is in some part of South Bombay. A set of guys from one community decided to get together. All of them under 30. They decided to also go to shops around the area, rustle up monies. Now, it cost them something like 15 or 16 rupees. They provide this for 1 rupee, a complete meal, anywhere from 11:30 to about 2 o'clock. From vegetable vendors to rickshaw drivers, you'll see guys from banks walking in and eating in this place. Lovely stuff. Why are they doing this? What is their reason to want to do this? This one on the left is done by another friend of mine in a village which is about 2 hours northwest of Bangalore. This guy, he returned from the US after some 17 years that he spent there. He came back about 6 or 8 years ago. He settled down in this village. He's now working with about 1,000 households there, which is about 5,000 or 6,000 people. And he's coming up with a language that you can speak on a smartphone. He calls it Alipi, A-L-I-P-I, which is no lipi. That I don't know how to read. I can only see a number perhaps. So I ask, so what is the price of ragi in Kannada or some other local language? And it gives you a certain kind of it gives you detail on the face of the phone. Now I asked him a very simple question. I said, look, these smartphones cost them anywhere from 7 to 14, 15,000 rupees today. He says, no, don't worry about that. The market ecosystem will change. What you bought as regular phones in 97 at 25,000 rupees, today is available at 2,000. So you can imagine what changed in the marketplace. He says, give it another 5 to 6 years, you'll have smartphones available at 2,000. And therefore, across India, and you got something like 500, 600 million phones, which are non-smart today, they will change into this new ecosystem, and villages can get access to information of another kind. So why is Dinesh doing this? Why does he need to quit his job, come back here to India, and do what he is doing? It looks exactly like the Sri Yantra Mandala. Now, in this section, over some 3 or 4 slides, I'm going to tell you that of the kind of powerful connect that India has, and ISKCON recognizes this. India has, in comparison to any other part of the world, just the sound of Om goes back at least 5,000, 6,000 years, maybe more, maybe back into another kalpa and such things. When you recite Tato Yuddha Parishrantam, Samare Chintayastitam, you are actually connecting with somebody who did this maybe 3,000 years ago, or even the sound of Gayatri itself. And when you're talking of Savitar there, Bhurbhavasava Tat Savitar. On Savitar, there is a man called Tirumala Iyengar. In 1928, he wrote a book of 300 pages on just Savitar, not on the Gayatri. So there is some enormous power and significance in each of the words and the sounds and this powerful continuity that we have as a civilization. Why are we now stepping into these malls and buying into this American culture? Why are we losing our own self-esteem and self-worth? I ask a lot of you here who are under 20 and under 25. When our parents tell us to read or chant the Shanti Mantra, you Sah Viryam Karvavahai. When you talk of Viryam, you're talking about the very source of energy in food that we eat. Why is it that you don't eat grass? Why is it that you don't eat a lot of other things, but you eat only certain things? There is a certain kind of ecosystem intelligence and consciousness in all of us, which has come, don't even ask me where it comes from. There is something that is, when you go back to the epistemology of Hinduism, for instance, it's so complex that it will need more than a lifetime to understand these impossible connects that take you to words like Virium, you know. Whether it was Varahamira, whether it was Mayur Chitraka, Meghamala, for instance, you know, was another wonderful work from Varahamira. The Brihad Samhita is another thing that came about the same time. That sky, the photograph of the sky there is from Chile when there was an earthquake which hit beyond 8 on the Richter scale. Look at the patterns of the clouds there and the lights. Mihira writes, if there is, one of the things that he writes about is how huge clouds resembling blue lily and bees, rumbling pleasantly and shining with flashes of lightning, will lead to a quake in the region in 5 to 7 days. He gives you 20 cloud patterns which can help you predict earthquakes. How on earth he knew this? That was in the Brihad Samhita. He writes again in another place, if there is a termite mound near and east of a jambu tree, plenty of sweet water yielding for a long time occurs at a depth of 2 purushas, he says. So I tried to understand what 2 purushas is. It turns out that eventually it's about 9 meters to 1 purusha. That's about 18 meters or 54, 55 feet. Then he says, an Arjuna tree with a termite mound to the north shows water at a depth of 3.5 purushas or a distance of 3 hastas to the west. Now, we are also working on some 4 villages, about 12,000 hectares, about 120 square kilometers, about 2-3 hours from Bangalore, in a district called Chikbalapur. And you know what we are doing? We are taking these scripts and we are trying to understand how we can possibly map on the basis of things that the Brihad Samhita is giving us, or even even things like Mayur Chitraka is offering us. The other thing I have never understood in this country is, every day, most Hindus, well, at least they used to in my father's time, pray for the sun, or at least do one chant on the Gayatri. But we don't see a temple for the sun. We don't see a temple for Parashurama. I've seen only one somewhere south of Goa. We don't see a temple for Brahma in most places. Again, back to the epistemology of Hinduism, I don't quite understand what these connects are and how they connected back to ecology and environment. All of this, believe you me, were not about gods and millions of gods. They were all to do with certain patterns of consciousness that they were trying to, in very simple ways, they thought, and it seems complex to us, explaining to us. Arthashastra, for instance, 4th century AD. Trilokasara is a Jain piece of literature, which is about 3rd century. Vishnu Purana, later on, 6th century, in Gupta's dynasty, they're writing about these things, and of course, Brihad Samhita, as I told you earlier. Kautilya writes, 4th century, believe me, this guy is writing about how the rain gauge, which is known as the Varshaman, in those days it was known as the Varshaman, in front of the storehouse, a bowl with its mouth as wide as an aratni, 18 inches, shall be set up as a rain gauge. And that photograph is not from India. This is a Japanese photograph. But look at it. In terms of its span on the dia, this is about soils, actually. This is from Matru Mandir, sorry. The next picture will be about Japan. This picture is from Pondicherry. Trilokasara writes about 7 types of soils. He says black, white, yellowish, blue or red, yellow, gravelly, hilly or boulder, golden hued. How did they work on these soils? What is the significance that they brought up? Today, in farms, in small farms that we're working with about 800 farmers in one place, in Dodbalapur Taluka, which is close to Bangalore. We're working in Raichur district with about 1,500 farmers. We want to increase that to about 5,000 farmers now. And what are we finding? I go to a farmer who's owning about 2.5 acres, 3 acres. None of them know how to do a soil health check every time after a harvest. They've not even considered doing such health checks. Now the government of India in the last 2 years have come up with some extension services. They're offering it free at the district directorate offices and so on. But these guys understood what soils meant. Trilokasara, there is a man called Nemi Chandra writes, there are 7 types of periodic clouds. He connects it back to soils. The other man was writing about earthquakes and clouds. This man is talking about clouds and soils. The rain for 7 days in each in the rainy season, he says. Then there are 12 species of white clouds. They also bring rain for 7 days. He writes about how India has about 133 days in all of rains. There's another section somewhere else who is writing about how we have got only 87 hours of rains. 87 hours. As you all know, in a year we have got about 8,640 hours. So you got 1% of the time in a year when in India, this is very unique to India, you get rains. Actual raining time is only 87 hours. Now, what does that mean to you? Which our kings knew. For all time, the last 2,000 years, they knew how to build their tanks. They knew how to build their cascades. They knew how to build dug wells and open wells. They knew how to store water. We have lost it. In the last 30, 35 years, ever since we got this one disease of, plunging bore wells, we just lost it. Today in Kochi, I'm seeing that there are people, citizens are getting angry with the government for not providing them water. I'm saying, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about treating the water if you're living in an apartment or even in an individual home? What are you doing about not reducing consumption of water? No one's talking about that. No one's talking about compromising comfort or even convenience or luxury. What can you do to see that this quantum of water that your city is now using of 400 milliliters drops by 70%? Believe me, it can happen. We have done it over something like 1,500 houses. We're now doing it for another 3,000 to 5,000 houses. And we're seeing that it's possible, that you say no first to the water supply board. Don't even pay the deposit. Cut away the connection at all. Rely on rainwater in a region like this where you're getting 2,000 mm rainfall. I was in Jaipur about 11, 12 days ago. They get 550 mm rainfall. They're getting about 23%, 24% of what you get as rainfall. In your state, you talk inches, they talk mm there. What are you doing about it in your state? If I have gained, or we have all gained anything at all from this day, and from the rest of us as speakers here, you should go out from here and say to yourself, I am going to change these things and do some 6, 7 things. You want to take my mail ID and write to me, I will give you, maybe 8 to 12 things that you can do in your own home. Or if you're in an apartment, you can make it maybe about 15 things. I have my last set of slides here. This is what we do. I'm just now working on the revival of a river called Dakshina Pinakini, which is on the eastern flanks of Bangalore. From the northeast, it runs to the southeast. It wanders off into Tamil Nadu after that. We have got about 112 kilometers here. And what is our battle there? Telling farmers, please, please don't use your deep bore wells beyond the granite shelf. Remember, you're on the plateau here too. You're in Parashuram Dham. You need to see how you can therefore, and you've got so many rivers coming into your place. You are very, very extremely fortunate. We are not sitting there in Chikbalapur district. We're telling our farmers, first change your crop patterns, remove all these water inefficient crops, go with pulses, go with millets, not go with vegetables, not go with paddy or with wheat or any of those strains, sugarcane for instance, which takes too much water. So what do we do? What can you do? How can you join us, for example, some of you youngsters here, or how can you support us or just be inspired into doing things that we do? That's what you need to be looking at. Here, for instance, if you look at on the right side, we've got this zero energy housing I've actually told you about. I could have spoken about that, believe me, today. I could have spoken about the numbers of things that you need to do on food, energy, water, waste, education within your residential campuses, what you need to be doing about treatment of water, what you need to be doing about, not trapping heat and letting it escape on building materials. I got to talk to you about air conditioners that can save 70%, on energy consumption. I can talk to you about water efficient fixtures that drop flow of water while not discomforting you. I got to talk about multiple other things like that, about 58 to 60 such things that you can do, I can do. It's not that we have used any nuclear science to understand what we have understood. We just looked. We have just searched. And today it's so much easier than it was in those days for us to be finding solutions. So this is not about vendors. This is not about somebody else who will drop, from out of the skies and tell you what you need to be doing. This is about you. This is about you searching for it. This is my last slide. In the last 2 years, when the Mahakumbh happened in Allahabad, 100 million people went there. There was no one who advertised. They went on their own. Nobody paid them their travel costs. Why did they go? Why did they go to the Ganga Sagar? At the Ganga Sagar, there were 80 million people south of Calcutta. At Nashik, last month, I was hearing from one of the Swamijis who went there from the Ganga Sagar mission. He was saying, हाँ थे वैसे करोड़ सवा करोड़ 10 million, 12 million people. Why do they go? Can we do something like that to what we face today on energy and water? Do we need our governments to tell us? Do we need to be doing it ourselves? And how do we find it from within? How do you go back to your grandmother who always scolded you when you took that, half empty glass of water and you wanted to pour it down the drain, and she said, no, you will be sinning because that's Ganga you are flowing down the drain. How do you learn from such these things and take this from within yourself? That's my mail ID if you want to write to me. Thank you so much for listening to me.